My tea had gone cold, much like the space Clara used to occupy in my heart. I sat in the stillness of my living room, the grandfather clock in the hall ticking away the seconds of my new, emptier life. Its rhythmic chime, a sound that had comforted me for 40 years, now felt like a countdown to nothing. On the mantelpiece, a silver frame held a photograph of a smiling, gap-toothed little girl with bright pigtails, her arm slung around the neck of her father. My husband, Richard. My daughter, Clara. That photograph was a relic from a different civilization, a time when our small family felt like a self-contained universe of unconditional love. I used to look at it and feel a warmth spread through my chest. Now, I saw it as a historical document of what I had lost, or perhaps, what I had never truly had. The wedding album, a monstrosity of white leather and gold leaf, sat on the coffee table, unopened since the day it was delivered. It cost a small fortune, a fact I was reminded of every time I glanced at it. I had paid for it, of course. I had paid for everything. I paid for the Vera Wang dress that Clara had insisted was the only one that didn't make her look provincial. I paid for the 7-course meal for 300 guests, most of whom I didn't know. I paid for the French champagne, the string quartet, and the floral arrangements that cost more than my first car. I paid for the foundation of a marriage that, from the very beginning, had no room for me in it. And they never knew, not really, the depth of the well from which they were drinking. They thought they were draining my life savings, a modest pool accumulated by a sensible widow. They imagined my accounts dwindling with every floral centerpiece and every bottle of imported wine. They saw me as a sweet, slightly dotty old woman, a relic of a bygone era, whose purpose was to provide a launchpad for their brilliant, modern future. They had no idea about Richard. They had no idea that my quiet, unassuming husband, the man who wore the same tweed jacket for 20 years and drove a sensible sedan, was a financial wizard. He saw patterns in the market the way a composer hears a symphony. He never sought accolades or flaunted his success. For him, it was a game, a complex puzzle that he delighted in solving. Our wealth wasn't for show, it was for security. It was for peace of mind. It was meant to be a fortress against the cruelties of the world. And it was our secret. A delicious, private secret that bound us together. After he passed, I took over the quiet management of it all. I understood the portfolios, the trusts, the offshore accounts. I was never just the wife who arranged dinner parties. I was his partner, his confidant, his co-pilot. I understood the power of what we had built, but more importantly, I understood its purpose. Or I thought I did. My life post-Richard was intentionally simple. I lived in the same comfortable, but unpretentious house we'd bought in the 70s. I drove a 5-year-old Volvo. I shopped at the local market. This wasn't an act, it was who I was. It was who we were. I found contentment in my garden, in my books, in my memories. Clara saw this simplicity not as a choice, but as a limitation. She saw my life as small, and by extension, she saw me as small. And her fiancé, Julian, a man sculpted from ambition and entitlement, saw it as a resource to be exploited before it dried up. The greatest secret of all, the one Richard and I had cherished the most, was the island. He'd bought it in the late 90s, a tiny, emerald jewel in the Caribbean we called Isla de Serenidad. It wasn't some flashy resort property, but a protected nature conservancy with a single, elegant, self-sustaining villa nestled in its heart. It was to be our final act, our quiet retreat from the world. We had spent years planning it, poring over architectural drawings and solar panel specifications. Richard died before we could ever set foot on it together. For 5 years it sat there, waiting. A silent, potent symbol of everything I held in reserve. I never told Clara. Not because I wanted to be deceitful, but because I was waiting for the right time. I imagined revealing it to her one day, perhaps when she had a family of her own, as a legacy of her father's love and brilliance. A place for her children to experience the natural world. I had no idea that by the time her wedding day arrived, the island would no longer be a future gift for her, but a necessary escape for me. I ran my finger over the rim of the cold teacup. The bitterness of the steeped leaves matched the taste in my soul. They thought they had taken so much from me. And they had. They had taken my trust, my illusions, my belief in the daughter I thought I had raised. But they had no idea, not a single clue, about what I had kept for myself. The announcement came on a crisp autumn afternoon. Clara breezed into my kitchen, her face flushed with a kind of manic glee I hadn't seen since she was a child on Christmas morning. Behind her, holding her hand in a proprietary way, was Julian. I'd met him a few times before. He was handsome in a severe, corporate way, with a haircut that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Mom, we have news," Clara trilled, waving her left hand in my face. A diamond, large and aggressively square, caught the afternoon light, and threw a shard of rainbow across my linoleum floor. It was a beautiful stone, I had to admit, but it felt cold, like a chip of ice. I hugged her, of course. I expressed my delight, my surprise, my happiness for her. I poured them both a glass of the sherry I kept for special occasions. Julian accepted his with a curt nod, sniffing it like a connoisseur before taking a sip. He looked around my kitchen, his eyes lingering for a moment on the slightly worn formica countertops and the collection of mismatched mugs hanging from hooks under the cabinet. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the swift calculation and dismissal of my entire existence. "Julian has been so wonderful, Mom," Clara gushed, her voice an octave higher than usual. "His family is in finance, you know. Old money. They have a place in the Hamptons," she said, the Hamptons with a practiced reverence, as if it were a holy land. I simply smiled. "That's lovely, dear. Richard and I had once, on a whim, put a down payment on a property in the Hamptons in the early 80s, only to sell it 6 months later, for a threefold profit, because we found the social posturing insufferably dull. The money from that sale had seeded one of our most successful long-term investments. The irony was a private, bitter pill. A week later, the first request came. They sat across from me at my dining room table, a united front of youthful desire. They had found the perfect apartment, they explained. A pre-war 2-bedroom, with good bones in a fashionable part of the city. Julian did most of the talking, using terms like market value, investment potential, and a long-term equity. Clara just nodded along, her eyes wide and pleading. Then came the punchline. "The thing is, Evelyn," Julian said, leaning forward and attempting a confidential tone that felt deeply patronizing, "the down payment is a little steep. We have a good portion of it saved, of course, but we're just short." He named a figure. It was, to be fair, a significant amount of money for any normal person. For me, it was the annual dividend from a single, medium-risk stock portfolio. I knew, with sickening certainty, that this was a test. A probe to see how deep the well was. I looked at my daughter. In her face, I saw the genuine hope and excitement of a young woman starting her life. I chose to see that, and only that. I ignored the flicker of calculation in Julian's gaze. I ignored the subtle pressure of the situation. I wanted her to be happy. At the end of my life, what else was there to want for your only child? "Of course," I said, my voice betraying none of my internal conflict. "I want to help you get started on the right foot. I think I can manage that." The relief that washed over Clara's face was so pure it almost broke my heart. She jumped up and hugged me, burying her face in my shoulder. "Oh, Mom, thank you. I knew you'd understand. You're the best." Julian remained seated, a small, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. "That's incredibly generous of you, Evelyn," he said. The way he said my name felt like an assertion of dominance, a reminder that I was no longer Mrs. Miller, or even Clara's mother in his eyes, but appear he was managing. The next day, I went to the bank. Not my primary investment bank, of course, but the local branch where I kept what Clara thought of as my savings. This was the money I used for household expenses, property taxes, and my own modest discretionary spending. It was a carefully curated account, designed to present a picture of a comfortable but limited widowhood. I made the transfer. The bank manager, a pleasant man named Mr. Henderson, looked at the figure. "That's a hefty withdrawal, Mrs. Miller." "Everything all right?" he asked with genuine concern. "Perfectly fine, David," I replied with a warm smile. "My daughter is buying her first home. It's a wonderful investment in her future." As I walked out of the bank, the sun felt a little colder. I had passed their test. I had proven that the well was deep enough to be worth their attention. I had just paid the entrance fee for a game I was only beginning to understand, and I already knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was going to lose. The purchase of the apartment was just the overture. The wedding was to be the grand opera. Shortly after they moved in, Clara called me, her voice a whirlwind of excitement. "Mom, we've hired a wedding planner. She's simply a genius. Her name is Colette de Viers, and she does all the high society weddings. She has a vision for our day that is just breathtaking." The name sounded expensive, pretentious, and utterly exhausting. My wedding to Richard had taken place at the local city hall, followed by a luncheon in my parents' backyard with 50 of our closest friends and family. It had been perfect. But I knew better than to say that. "How wonderful, dear," I said, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice. A week later, the three of us met with Colette in her chic, all-white office. She was a rail-thin woman with a severe black bob, and an accent that floated somewhere between Paris and Park Avenue. She spoke in a flurry of superlatives, using words like tablescape, experimental, and curated moment. She laid out mood boards covered in pictures of Tuscan villas, Belgian lace, and cascading orchids. It was all very beautiful and entirely impersonal. Julian was in his element, nodding sagely and discussing vintages of champagne with Colette, as if they were old friends. Clara was mesmerized, her eyes sparkling. I felt like an anthropologist observing a strange and baffling ritual. Then, Colette slid a preliminary budget across the polished marble table. I had to consciously stop my jaw from dropping. The figure at the bottom was more than the down payment I had just given them. It was more than the price of my entire house. I saw line items for things I couldn't comprehend. Lighting design consultant, calligraphy services, guest welcome baskets. I looked at Clara, expecting to see a flicker of shock, or at least concern. Instead, her face was alight with pure desire. "Isn't it divine, Mom?" she breathed. Julian looked at me, his expression smooth and unreadable. "It's a lot, I know," he said, affecting a tone of reasonableness. "But Colette assures us this is the going rate for an event of this caliber. It's an investment, really. In our future, in our social standing, an investment." There was that word again. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. They weren't just planning a wedding, they were launching a brand. And I was the primary shareholder they expected to fund the IPO. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell them it was obscene, a grotesque display of materialism that Richard would have despised. I wanted to tell Clara that the foundation of a marriage isn't built on curated moments and expensive flower arrangements, but on shared values, respect, and quiet, everyday love. But I looked at my daughter's rapturous face, and the words died in my throat. This was her dream, however misguided I believed it to be. And what kind of mother denies her child's dream? So I nodded. I heard myself say, "If this is what will make you happy, Clara, we'll find a way to make it work." The words felt like ash in my mouth. "We?" Julian asked, a slight arch in his eyebrow. "Well, Evelyn, we were rather hoping, given that my family is covering the rehearsal dinner, and our honeymoon," the implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. This wasn't we, this was me, I was to be the sole financier of this production. Colette smiled, a blood-red slash in her pale face. It's so traditional and lovely when the bride's mother takes care of the celebration, she purred. It was a perfectly executed trap. I was cornered by tradition, by my daughter's expectations, and by my own deep-seated, foolish desire to please her. The invoices started arriving shortly after. First, the non-refundable deposit for the historic estate venue. Then the one for the photographer, a supposed artist who charged by the hour what I used to earn in a month. Then came the bill for the dress. Clara sent me a picture of herself in it, standing on a pedestal in a swanky boutique. She looked beautiful, like a princess from a fairy tale. But when I looked closer, I saw the price tag tucked into the seam. I felt a wave of nausea. Each invoice was a fresh cut. With every bank transfer, I felt a piece of my self-respect chip away. I was liquidating small, strategic assets, bonds Richard had bought decades ago, shares in blue-chip companies. It was all meticulously planned, moving funds from my private investment accounts into the widow's savings account that they could obliquely see. They saw the money appearing, but they had no concept of the vast, invisible ocean it was being drawn from. They thought they were seeing the last of my resources, my final sacrifice for my daughter's happiness. They had no idea it was just a rounding error. But it wasn't the money that truly hurt. It was the principle. It was the slow, dawning realization that I was no longer a person to them. I was a function. I was the First National Bank of Mom, and my sole purpose was to approve their withdrawals. The phone call from Arthur came on a Tuesday morning. I was in my garden, my hands deep in the soil, trying to ground myself in something real and tangible. Arthur had been Richard's closest friend since college, and our family's lawyer for nearly as long. He was a kind, sharp-witted man with a no-nonsense attitude that I had always appreciated. He was one of the few people on earth who knew the true state of my finances and the existence of the island. "Evelyn," he said, his voice warm, but laced with an undercurrent of concern. "I saw the transfer this morning. The one to De Vere's events, that's the third significant withdrawal this month. Are you all right?" I sighed, pulling off my gardening glove and leaning against the old oak tree in my backyard. The bark felt rough and steady against my back. "I'm fine, Arthur." "It's for the wedding," I could hear him take a slow, deliberate breath on the other end of the line. "Evelyn, we need to have lunch." "My treat. That little Italian place you like on Elm Street." Tomorrow at 1 inch. It wasn't a request, it was a gentle command. I knew better than to argue. The next day, we sat in a quiet corner booth, the scent of garlic and oregano in the air. For a while, we made small talk, catching up on his grandchildren and my garden. But Arthur, ever direct, eventually steered the conversation to the point. "This wedding budget," he began, placing his fork down carefully. "It's astronomical. Richard would be turning in his grave." He despised this kind of pointless extravagance. I winced. He was right. Richard used to say that flaunting wealth was a sign of deep insecurity. "I know," I murmured, staring into my water glass. "But Clara is so happy, Arthur. She's caught up in it all. And this young man, Julian." "I've done a little digging on Julian and his family," Arthur interrupted, his voice low. "They are not old money, Evelyn. His father is a moderately successful regional manager for a beverage distributor. They have a nice house in the suburbs, not a mansion in the Hamptons. They are comfortable, but they are projecting a lifestyle far beyond their means. This whole thing is a performance." The words landed like stones in my stomach. I suppose I had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by Arthur made it feel sordid and real. They weren't just spending my money, they were using it to build a fantasy, a lie they could present to the world. "He wants to climb," Arthur continued, his eyes full of sympathy. And he sees you and Clara as a rung on the ladder. He sees what he thinks is a pot of gold at the end of a widow's rainbow, and he's encouraging Clara to drain it before it disappears. She loves him, I said weakly, the words tasting like a lie even to me. Does she? Arthur countered gently. Or does she love the idea of him? The life he promises. Evelyn, think about the conversations you have with her. Does she ask how you are? Does she talk about anything other than the wedding, the apartment, the things she wants? When was the last time she did something for you? His questions were like a series of small, sharp cuts. I couldn't remember. Every phone call, every visit for the past 6 months had been a prelude to a request. Every conversation was a transaction. The realization was so stark, so painful, that I felt tears welling in my eyes. I blinked them back fiercely. I would not cry in an Italian restaurant. Richard set up those trusts for a reason, Arthur said, his voice softening. He wanted you to be secure, independent, and free. He wanted you to travel, to pursue your passions, to live your life fully. He didn't build that fortune so it could be frittered away on ice sculptures and designer dresses for a girl who's forgotten where she came from. He reached across the table and patted my hand. I'm not telling you to cut her off. I'm just telling you to be careful. Protect yourself. Remember what this money is for. It's your security, Evelyn. Your freedom. Don't let them take that from you. We talked for another hour. He reminded me of the safeguards Richard and he had put in place, the legal firewalls around the bulk of the estate that I could enact with a single phone call. He talked about the island, asking if the property manager was sending regular reports. It's still there, waiting for you, he said with a small smile. Serenidad. Peace. Richard was a smart man. I left that lunch feeling both validated and profoundly sad. Arthur had held up a mirror, and I didn't like the reflection I saw. I saw a woman who was allowing her love for her daughter to be weaponized against her. I saw a fool. The meal with Arthur steeled my resolve, but I wasn't ready to detonate my relationship with my only child just yet. I decided I would draw a line, a small one, but a line nonetheless. I would show them, and myself, that I was not an infinite resource. I would say a quiet, reasonable no. The opportunity presented itself less than a month before the wedding. They arrived for dinner on a Sunday, bearing a bottle of wine that was clearly meant as a lubricant for the conversation to come. We ate, the conversation stilted and focused entirely on the final wedding preparations. Clara talked about the seating chart, as if it were a complex military strategy. Julian lamented the exchange rate for their upcoming honeymoon, a subtle and clumsy piece of foreshadowing. After I had cleared the plates, they sat me down on the sofa, a look of grave importance on their faces. Mom, Clara began, her voice soft and practiced. We've been doing the final accounting for everything, and first of all, we just want to say how incredibly grateful we are for your generosity. We couldn't have done any of this without you. Julian nodded solemnly, a mask of sincerity plastered on his face. It's been truly remarkable, Evelyn. Here it comes, I thought. The thing is, Clara continued, twisting a napkin in her hands, we've planned the most amazing honeymoon. It's a once-in-a-lifetime trip. 3 weeks. We start in Paris, then a week in a villa in Tuscany, and we finish on a yacht in the Greek islands. It sounded exhausting and performative. A trip designed for Instagram rather than genuine experience. That sounds ambitious, I said carefully. It is, she chirped. But it's the perfect start to our new life together. The only issue is, it's a little more than we budgeted for, even with the contribution from Julian's parents. She paused, taking a deep breath. We were hoping you could help us with the last piece of the puzzle. We've thought of it as our wedding gift from you. Julian slid a brochure across the coffee table. It was glossy and filled with pictures of impossibly beautiful people on sun-drenched beaches. Tucked inside was a printout of the itinerary and the total cost. The number was breathtaking. It was more than my father had earned in a decade of hard labor at the factory. This was their new test. This was the one they thought I couldn't possibly refuse. The emotional blackmail was layered on thick. Our wedding gift, the perfect start, the last piece. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The fear and anxiety I'd been feeling for months suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This was my line in the sand. Clara, Julian, I began, my voice even and steady. It sounds like a magnificent trip. And I do want to give you a wedding gift. I saw Clara's face light up. I will give you a check for $10,000. That's a very generous gift, and you can use it towards your honeymoon or to furnish your new home, whichever you prefer. The silence in the room was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if I had sucked all the air out. Clara's smile froze, then slowly dissolved into a look of disbelief. Julian's mask of sincerity dropped completely, revealing a flash of raw, ugly anger before he smoothed it over again. 10,000. Clara said, her voice a flat, bewildered monotone. Mom, the flights to Paris alone are almost that much. I understand that, I said calmly. But $10,000 is my gift. It's a substantial amount of money, and I'm very happy to give it to you, but you paid for the whole wedding, she stammered, her confusion morphing into indignation. The caterer cost 10 times that. Yes, I did, I replied. I paid for the celebration of your marriage. This is a trip for your own pleasure. My gift is $10,000. Julian finally spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. Evelyn, with all due respect, I think you might be underestimating the standard of travel we are accustomed to. This isn't a weekend trip to the seaside. The insult was so blatant, so dismissive of my entire life and experience, that it barely registered as a sting. It was just data. It was confirmation of everything Arthur had said. My offer stands, I said, my voice as cold as ice. $10,000. You can accept it or not. Clara stared at me, her eyes welling up with tears of frustration, not sadness. I don't understand you, she whispered, her voice trembling with anger. Why are you being so stingy? After everything. It's like you want to punish us. This isn't a punishment, Clara. It's a gift, I repeated, feeling my patience fraying. A very generous one. They left soon after that. The air was thick with resentment. Clara didn't hug me goodbye. Julian gave me a curt, dismissive nod. As I watched their car pull away, I didn't feel the pang of regret I had expected. Instead, I felt a sliver of something that had been missing for a very long time, self-respect. I had finally said no. I had drawn my line. I had no idea how viciously they were about to cross it. The week before the wedding was a blur of last-minute errands and tense phone calls. The warmth that had been rekindled by my small act of defiance quickly chilled under the frost of Clara's disapproval. She spoke to me only when necessary, her voice clipped and formal, discussing logistical details, as if I were a vendor she had hired. The joy and excitement of a mother preparing for her daughter's wedding, a feeling I had long imagined, was completely absent. It had been replaced by a gnawing sense of alienation. The true blow, the one that felt less like a cut and more like a physical assault, came on the Wednesday before the ceremony. I was expecting a call about the final flower delivery when Clara's name flashed on my phone. Hi, Mom, she said, her voice unnaturally bright. So, a little change of plans for Friday night. You know, the rehearsal dinner. Of course, I said. I have my dress all ready. It was a simple, but elegant navy blue dress I had bought especially for the occasion. Well, about that, she said, a nervous cough punctuating her sentence. Julian's parents have decided to make it a bit more of a business networking event. Julian's father is trying to close a big deal, and a lot of the guests will be his clients and partners from the city. I waited, a cold dread creeping up my spine. I knew what was coming. The thing is, it's going to be a lot of shop talk, very boring, stuffy financial chat. We were thinking, well, we thought you'd be terribly bored. And you'll have such a long day on Saturday. We think it would be better if you just rested up on Friday night. Save your energy for the main event. I was speechless. The silence stretched for a painfully long time. She had disinvited me from her rehearsal dinner. My own daughter. The excuse was so flimsy, so transparently insulting, it was breathtaking. You'd be bored. It's stuffy financial chat. Me, the woman who had quietly managed a portfolio that could buy and sell Julian's father's entire company 10 times over, was being told I wouldn't understand shop talk. I was being dismissed as a simple old woman who needed her rest. So I'm not to come. I finally managed to say, my voice a hollow whisper. It's for the best, Mom, really, she said, her relief at having gotten the words out making her voice sound chirpy and cruel. It's not a big deal. The wedding is the important part. We'll see you at the church on Saturday, a not so big deal. It was, I realized, a very big deal. It was a public declaration. I was the financial backer, the silent partner, but I was not worthy of a seat at their table. I was the help. I provided the capital, but I was not to mingle with the real investors. My presence, my simple, unpretentious existence, was an embarrassment to the brand they were so carefully building with my money. I see, I said. My voice was devoid of all emotion. I had gone numb. Well, you have a lovely time then, dear. I'll see you on Saturday. I hung up the phone before she could reply. I walked into my bedroom and looked at the navy blue dress hanging on the wardrobe door. It looked lonely and hopeful. I carefully took it off the hanger, folded it, and placed it back in its box. I pushed the box to the back of the closet, behind my winter coats. Out of sight. I didn't cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard stone in the pit of my stomach. I thought of Richard. I imagined telling him this story, and I could almost hear his quiet, rumbling laughter. Not laughter at me, but at the sheer, audacious folly of it all. He would have seen it for what it was instantly, a pathetic power play by insecure people. That evening, I sat alone in my quiet house, the silence amplifying the insult. They would be at a lavish restaurant, Julian's father holding court, Julian and Clara playing the part of the happy, successful young couple. They would be toasting to their future, a future I had paid for, and I would not even be a memory in the room. I had been erased. For the first time, a genuine, burning resentment began to smolder within me. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about dignity. They had taken my generosity and twisted it into an obligation, and now they were taking my dignity, too. I had thought my small no about the honeymoon was a victory. I realized now that it was merely a provocation. This was their retaliation. This was their way of putting me back in my place. And as I sat there, the smoldering resentment began to catch fire, turning into a cold, clear, and focused rage. The morning of the wedding, I woke to a grey, overcast sky that perfectly matched my mood. I went through the motions of getting ready like an automaton. I put on the pale grey silk suit I had chosen, a color that felt appropriate for a funeral. I styled my hair. I applied my makeup. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger staring back at me, a calm, composed woman whose eyes held a deep, chilling coldness. The love and warmth I once felt for my daughter had been extinguished, replaced by a hollow sense of duty. I was attending this event because it was expected of me, a final performance in a play I no longer wished to be a part of. The church ceremony was beautiful, I suppose. The air was thick with the scent of 1,000 white roses, another line item on an invoice I had paid. Clara was radiant as she walked down the aisle on the arm of a distant uncle, as I had been deemed too emotional to be trusted with the task. She looked like an angel, a perfect bride from a magazine. But as she passed my pew, she glanced at me, and her eyes held not warmth or love, but a flicker of anxiety, the look of someone checking to see if a problematic employee had shown up on time. I felt nothing. The vows were exchanged, promises of eternal love and partnership that sounded utterly false to my ears. Julian looked proud, triumphant, the CEO of a newly acquired asset. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the congregation burst into applause. I clapped politely, my hands making no sound. The reception was held at the historic estate, a grand, imposing building that seemed to suck the light from the gloomy afternoon. I moved through the crowds of strangers, a ghost at the feast. People would occasionally approach me, Julian's relatives or Colette's society friends, and say, "You must be so proud." I would smile and nod, a perfect porcelain doll of a mother of the bride. "Immensely," I would reply, the word tasting like poison. The speeches began after the main course. Julian's father, a ruddy-faced man with an overly loud voice, stood up. He spoke at length about his son's ambition and drive. He welcomed Clara to their family. Then he raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he boomed, "to all those who have invested in this wonderful young couple's future, who have provided the support and foundation for them to build their new life together." He nodded towards several well-dressed couples at the head table, presumably his business associates. "And of course, to Clara's dear mother, Evelyn, for raising such a lovely daughter." That was it. I was an afterthought. A footnote. The primary investor, the sole funder of the entire spectacle, was reduced to Clara's dear mother, a biological fact, not a contributor. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread across my chest. I took a slow sip of water, my hand perfectly steady. But the final, irrevocable blow had not yet landed. It came later, when the band was playing and the champagne was flowing freely. I was standing near a curtained alcove, seeking a moment of quiet, when I heard Clara's voice from the other side. She was talking to a bridesmaid, her voice loose and unguarded from the champagne. "I know, it's just a bit of a disappointment," Clara was saying, her tone a mixture of petulance and complaint. "The honeymoon, I mean. We'll have to make do. It's just so frustrating." "What happened?" "I thought your mom was paying for it," the bridesmaid replied. Then came the words that shattered the last remaining shard of my heart. "Oh, I tried," Clara said with a sigh that was pure theatre. "But she got all stingy at the last minute. She just doesn't understand our world, you know. The importance of these things. Honestly, it's probably for the best she keeps to her little house and her little budget. She wouldn't fit in. Her little house. Her little budget." I had been categorized, judged, and dismissed by my own child. The woman who had given her everything was now an embarrassment, a relic from a simpler world that she was desperate to escape. In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic snap, but a quiet, clean fracture. The pain was so sharp, so absolute, that it transcended emotion and became a point of perfect, diamond-hard clarity. I turned without a sound and walked away from the alcove. I moved gracefully through the laughing, dancing crowd. No one noticed me. I was invisible, just as they wanted me to be. I collected my coat from the cloakroom, walked out of the grand, imposing building, and didn't look back. The night air was cold and damp, and it felt like a cleansing baptism. The drive home was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the sound of the tires on the wet pavement. I was no longer grieving. I was no longer hurt. All that was left was a profound, arctic cold. The Bank of Mom wasn't just closed. It was about to be demolished. I walked into my silent house, and didn't bother turning on the main lights. The grandfather clock chimed midnight, heralding the beginning of a new day, and a new life. I walked directly to my study, the room Richard and I had shared, the epicenter of our quiet financial empire. I sat down in his large leather chair, which still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco and old books. The comforting scent, which usually brought a wave of nostalgia, now felt like a call to action. I was no longer Evelyn Miller, the grieving widow and doting mother. I was Richard's partner, the custodian of his legacy, and I had a duty to protect it from predators, even when one of them was my own flesh and blood. My hands did not tremble. My mind was a steel trap. The emotional fog had lifted, revealing a landscape of stark, logical choices. I switched on my desk lamp, illuminating a stack of files and my computer. For a moment, I sat and looked at the picture on my desk. It was of Richard and me on our 25th anniversary, standing on a windswept cliff in Scotland. We looked happy, content, fortified by a love that was a true partnership. "All right, Richard," I whispered into the quiet room. "Let's fix this." My first call was to Arthur. It was late, but I knew he'd be awake. He was a night owl, just like me. He answered on the second ring. "Evelyn? Is everything all right?" The wedding was very informative," I said, my voice crisp and devoid of any wobble. "Arthur, it's time. I want you to execute the plan we discussed. Project Serenidad is a go." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then I heard the satisfaction in his voice. "I was hoping you'd call." "Are you sure, Evelyn? Once we do this, there's no going back." "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied. "I want you to start the process first thing in the morning. Liquidate the local accounts. All of them. Transfer the funds to the main Zurich holding. I want that widow's savings account to have nothing left in it but dust. Change the beneficiary on my primary life insurance policy from Clara to the conservation charity Richard favored. And, most importantly, I want you to formally activate the firewall on the primary family trust. I want Clara's access, present and future, completely and irrevocably severed." "Consider it done," Arthur said, a note of admiration in his tone. "What about the house?" "I'll handle the house," I said. "And Arthur? Book me a one-way flight to the island. As soon as you can. I'll have a private jet waiting for you at the executive airport by noon tomorrow," he replied. "I'll handle the logistics. You just get ready." We spoke for a few more minutes, confirming details with the cold precision of two generals planning a campaign. When I hung up, I felt a surge of power, a feeling I hadn't realized was so dormant within me. I turned to my computer and began my own work. I logged into the bank accounts Clara knew about. The balances were still healthy, as I had replenished them from other sources to pay for the wedding. I systematically initiated transfers, draining every last cent and moving the funds into a secure, encrypted offshore account that was a ghost in the system. I then logged into my utility accounts, electricity, water, gas, internet, for the house Clara and Julian lived in, the house whose mortgage I was subsidizing and whose down payment I had gifted. I scheduled the services to be disconnected for non-payment at the earliest possible date. Then, I opened a new document and began to compose a letter to my real estate agent. I was putting my home, this home of 40 years, on the market. It was full of memories, but they were now tainted. It was time for a clean break. I worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and a righteous fury that felt clean and pure. I shredded old documents, sorted files, and packed a single suitcase with the essentials: a few changes of clothes, my most important personal papers, the photo of Richard and me in Scotland, and the architectural plans for the Villa on Isla de Serenidad. By the time the sun began to rise, casting a pale, watery light into the study, my work was done. I had systematically and methodically dismantled the entire financial support structure that Clara and Julian had taken for granted. I had cauterized the wound. I looked around the quiet house, at the furniture that held so many memories, at the garden I had tended with such love. There was a pang of sadness, but it was a shallow, distant ache. The overwhelming feeling was one of liberation. I had been living in a prison of my own making, a gilded cage of maternal obligation. And I had just handed myself the key. I went and had a shower, washing away the last remnants of the wedding, of the hurt, of the woman I used to be. As I stood under the hot water, I thought of the island. I thought of the turquoise water, the white sand, the scent of tropical flowers. It was no longer a dream for my retirement. It was my lifeboat. The fallout was not immediate. I was already thousands of miles away when the first tremors would have been felt. Arthur had been as good as his word. A sleek, private jet was waiting for me at a small airfield outside the city. I left my Volvo in the long-term parking, dropped the keys in a mailbox addressed to a car donation charity, and walked away without a second glance. The flight was smooth and silent. As the jet climbed above the clouds, leaving the grey, dreary landscape behind, I felt the physical weight of my old life fall away. I landed on a small airstrip, on a neighboring island, and took a short helicopter ride to my final destination. The first sight of Isla de Serenidad took my breath away. It was even more beautiful than the photographs. A perfect crescent of green jungle fringed with pristine white sand, set in a sea of impossible blues and greens. The villa was a marvel of minimalist design, all clean lines, natural wood, and glass, perfectly integrated into the hillside, overlooking the sea. It was powered by the sun and cooled by the ocean breeze. It was quiet, peaceful, and utterly mine. The first few weeks were a blow of blessed solitude. I swam in the warm, clear water. I walked the empty beaches. I sat on the veranda for hours, watching the sea and the sky change color. I spoke to no one but the island's caretaker, a kind, quiet man named Mateo, who came twice a week with supplies. The silence was a balm to my wounded soul. I didn't think about Clara or Julian. I actively pushed them from my mind. I was detoxing from a relationship that had become toxic, and it required total abstinence. The first inkling of the storm breaking back home came in an email from Arthur about 3 weeks after my departure. "The natives are getting restless," he wrote. "Clara has been calling my office daily. She sounds agitated. Apparently, her credit card was declined at a rather expensive restaurant." I felt a grim smile touch my lips. It was starting. A few days later, another email. "The decibel level has increased. Julian himself called today. He tried to be charming at first, then demanding. He seems to be under the impression that there's been some sort of clerical error with the trust. I informed him that there was no error. The account has been restructured according to the benefactor's wishes." He was not pleased. I could picture Julian's handsome face turning ugly with rage. The clerical error was the removal of his wife's name. The final, inevitable confrontation happened a week after that. Arthur informed me that they had driven to my house, found it empty with a for sale sign in the yard, and had then descended upon his law office in a state of panic. He had agreed to arrange a video call. "You don't have to do this, Evelyn," he had written. "You owe them nothing, I know," I replied. "But I want to. I need to close this chapter myself." The call was scheduled for the next morning. I sat on my veranda, my laptop on the teak table in front of me, the sparkling Caribbean Sea as my backdrop. When their faces appeared on the screen, I was struck by how pale and stressed they looked. They were sitting in Arthur's conference room, the mahogany paneling making them look small and trapped. Clara spoke first. Mom, where are you? What is going on? Your house is for sale. Our accounts, there's no money. The electricity at the apartment was turned off. It's a nightmare." Her voice was shrill with panic. "I am perfectly safe, Clara," I said, my voice calm and even. The sound of the gentle surf was audible in the background. "What do you mean, safe? What have you done?" Julian interrupted, leaning into the camera. "Evelyn, this has gone far enough. Arthur is refusing to give us any straight answers. There has clearly been a massive mistake with your finances. We need you to come home and sort this out. There is no mistake, Julian, I said, looking directly into his eyes through the screen. Everything that has happened has been the result of my direct and deliberate instruction. Clara stared at me, her mouth agape. What are you talking about? Why would you do this to us? We are married, we are just starting our lives. You're ruining everything. Am I? I asked, a hint of steel in my voice. I seem to recall paying for the start of your lives in its entirety. A wedding, an apartment. It seems to me that the only thing I have ruined is your access to my bank account. This is about the honeymoon, isn't it? Clara cried, tears of rage and frustration streaming down her face. This is because you were being stingy and we got upset. This is cruel. This is a punishment. Stingy, I repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. That's an interesting choice of words. And no, Clara, this is not a punishment. It is a consequence. A consequence of your actions. A consequence of you telling your bridesmaid that I wouldn't fit in with your new world. A consequence of being dismissed and disinvited from my own daughter's life events after I had financed them. A consequence of being told I should stick to my little house and my little budget. Their faces froze. The color drained from Clara's cheeks. Julian looked utterly stunned. They hadn't known I'd overheard. They had believed their contempt was a secret. You weren't supposed to hear that, Clara whispered, horrified. But I did, I said. And it was the most clarifying moment of my life. You see, you were right. I don't fit into your world. A world where a mother is seen not as a person, but as a bank. Where generosity is treated as an obligation, and where love is conditional on the size of a check. So I have decided to take your advice. I am sticking to my own world. The bank is closed. Permanently. The house is sold. The trusts have been restructured to protect them from your greed. You are on your own now. I wish you the life you deserve. I reached out and ended the call, plunging their shocked faces into blackness. I closed the laptop. The only sound was the sigh of the ocean. It was done. In the months that followed, I learned to breathe again. The silence I had initially craved was gradually filled with new sounds, new rhythms. I hired a local architect, a bright young woman from Trinidad, to help me design and build a small biological research station on the other side of the island, funded by the charity Richard and I had always supported. I found a renewed sense of purpose in the project, poring over plans, speaking with marine biologists, and learning about the delicate ecosystem I was now the guardian of. Arthur came to visit, staying for a week in the guest suite. We walked the beaches, drank rum punch on the veranda at sunset, and talked for hours. He brought me up to date on the sale of the house, which had gone through quickly and for a handsome price. He also, reluctantly, told me about Clara and Julian. The story was predictable and sad. Without my financial support, their lavish lifestyle had crumbled. They had been forced to sell the perfect apartment at a loss to cover their debts. Julian, whose career was built more on image than substance, struggled. His old money facade had evaporated, and with it, his prospects. According to Arthur's sources, the marriage was already showing deep, irreparable cracks. They were fighting constantly, mostly about money. Clara had tried to get a job, but found her art history degree didn't prepare her for much beyond being an assistant in a gallery, a position she considered beneath her. She had called Arthur's office a few more times, leaving tearful, then angry, then pleading messages, all of which went unanswered at my instruction. I listened to all of this with a strange sense of detachment. I felt a pang of sorrow, not for the adults they had become, but for the children they once were. I mourned the daughter I had loved, the little girl with the gap-toothed smile in the silver frame, a girl who had somewhere along the way gotten lost. But I did not feel guilt. I had not destroyed her life, I had simply stopped enabling her self-destruction. One afternoon, I was sitting on the veranda, reading. A gentle breeze rustled the palms, and the sea was a sheet of hammered silver under the afternoon sun. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me, a contentment so deep and pure it felt like a state of grace. I thought about the word rich. For so long, Clara and Julian had defined it as money, status, and possessions. They had pursued it with a single-minded, desperate hunger. But sitting here, in this place of quiet beauty, I understood what it truly meant. I was rich in time. I was rich in peace. I was rich in purpose. I had a second chance at life. A chapter 1 was writing entirely for myself. I had lost a daughter, yes, but I had found myself. I picked up the old photograph of Richard and me from the table beside me. I looked at his smiling, kind eyes. He had known the world was a noisy, complicated place. He had known that true wealth was the freedom to choose your own life. He hadn't just left me a portfolio of stocks and bonds. He hadn't just left me an island. He left me a choice. And for the first time in a very long time, I had finally chosen myself. The sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. A sense of hope, bright and boundless as the ocean before me, filled my heart. My new life was just beginning.